We're going to talk about the realities of AI's impact on SEO. And for this portion, you'll be seeing myself and Alex Boston, who will kind of be driving this portion of the presentation. And so one of the big things that's been a huge story in 2025 is AI search has stirred the clickbait again. People saying that SEO is dead. You no longer need to worry about SEO. I've been in SEO now for almost 14 years. And I can tell you 14 years ago when I started, this was a headline that popped up all the time. Google would make an update. Everyone would tell you SEO is dead. You no longer need to do it. And you have continued to need to do it. And we can assure you that SEO is still a huge part of the ongoing marketing experience, especially on the digital side. There's shifts in it, maybe things to consider that you didn't consider a few years ago. And we'll talk about this as we move forward. But first, we want to put some data behind showing you that SEO is dead. So is it dead? And obviously our answer is no. But the first thing is, but Google search volume is declining. In 2024, it saw a 20% increase in actual usage, right? So that's very recent. In 2025, there was some leveling off, but still a lot of people are using it. There's increases, there's not decreases on Google being used. And we'll show some data on people who have used ChatGPT and who have not, and what happens with their Google searches. Number two, AI search is taking over. The reality is this is just not true. Google search holds 90% of the market. And when we say this, we're really also accounting for Google's AI specific search, different from its AI overviews, but like you can go in AI search mode now. Google search is 90% of the market. The next closest one is actually Bing. It's not ChatGPT. You could even put all the AI tools together and they're still well below Bing, which we'll show some data in a second. And then search traffic is becoming less valuable. That's not true either. Search traffic is highly qualified traffic. It's very engaged. We see a lot of people not just getting on site and taking time on the site, but taking the desired action, right? Whether that's a form submission or making a purchase or reading the information on that page. We're still seeing that. Now, what we do see is maybe a shift in where some of the research happens. So we'll talk about that and some things that we'll call zero click, and we'll define that for you as we move along here. Here's some recent data by SparkToro and Datos. They put this report out quarterly, and it's monitoring search and how people are using search. So you can see here, if you look at September 2025, the most recent data, we can see that traditional search, which is in blue, is by far the most search used in terms of search. AI search is well under 1%. It's at 0.72%. You can see, though, if you go back to like January when it was 0.41%, it's definitely grown. It's growing at a faster rate than Google because Google is very mature in the market, but its search is still very low. One thing to distinguish here, we're talking about AI being used for search, not necessarily AI use. So if you're using AI for other things, that's not in this chart, right? So it's a kind of a different thing. I know I've seen other charts that say ChatGPT is 8% of the market. That's because in those reports, they're looking at all ChatGPT usage. The other thing to point in here, some people thought in summer, Google is starting to see it kind of trend down. In summer, that's actually some seasonality that always kicks in for Google. There's a couple things at play. College students are leaving college, so they're not searching as often. They're not online as much. The other thing is people are taking vacations, and part of what plays into that is kids who aren't in college are also out for summer, so parents are spending time with them, spending a little less time on their computers. So there's actually normally a dip in summer months, and we actually saw it recover, right? We see how that confirmed here in September. We see the recovery coming in, where Google went down to, like, traditional search went under 10% there. It went back up above 10% here. And this is this is some data here to kind of put in to put some clarity to the idea that ChatGPT or AI tools are not taking away from Google. On the left, this was released by SEMrush. On the left here, you can see that when people do not use ChatGPT, they use Google. They do about 10.5 sessions per week. And if you look at the right, if people use ChatGPT 5 times a week, they use Google 12.6 times a week. So what you're actually seeing is these AI tools, at least ChatGPT from the data here, is actually growing the use of Google. This is what we actually saw with Facebook back in the day when Facebook added search. That was another time when the clickbait came and said Google search is going to die. It's a huge threat to them. The reality is Facebook and other social medias have just become a different stop on the internet, another area that you market in, right? Just like ChatGPT, we want to market into those areas. We want to get you ranking for when people are doing search prompts, and one day ads as well. I'll throw in there, which is coming. They've been talking about recently, but it's increasing internet usage in a way. It's not taking away from it. And on this side here, we're looking at a couple different things. On the left, we do see the AI tools and their growth over the last couple of years. There's two things or three things I'll point out here. One, you can see ChatGPT is well above every other AI tool and it's growing. The other thing to point out, Gemini is the next tool that's kind of starting to distinguish itself. Gemini is from Google. That is starting to grow as well. And even some data is suggesting they're eating away at ChatGPT. So those are the two starting to stand out compared to the rest. You can see the rest. DeepSeek in February had a nice spike, January and February, but that has dropped down here. And there's no other clear winners. The rest of the main tools are really just kind of flowing even. If you really zoom in on that, some of them have some slight increases, some do have some decrease. And then on the right, we have a chart showing AI adaptation. So this is people adapting to AI. So you see it's going down. That does not mean the usage of AI is going down. It means the adaptation rates are going down. And it's pretty steady going here into June. That is kind of like the signal we're seeing, is that it's actually the adoption rate is getting lower. So we'll see how that kind of plays out in the future. The thing to keep in mind here, no one knows the future. ChatGPT for them specifically, right? They're one thing about them is they don't make a ton of revenue. They're actually losing quite a bit of money. So you never know if a different player is going to emerge from this down the road. And maybe they're so well positioned, they'll start to turn that around. But it's just worth keeping in mind that these tools, we don't know which one's going to be the dominant one in 5-10 years, but we want to future proof ourselves so that while their search volume is very low now, you want to get in there. You want to make sure you're showing up. And then Alex is going to talk about how we kind of incorporate that with SEO and how you can do that to kind of push yourself so you are future proofing your business to ensure you're getting that market share now and down the road.
All right. Thank you, Ed. So for anyone who hasn't worked with me before, I'm Alex Boston. I'm the SEO practice lead here at Northwoods. I focus mostly on SEO and content strategy, and how that interacts with AI has been a big component of my work in the last several months to almost a year now, since these tools started becoming really popularly used. So Ed definitely makes a very important point here, which is that traditional search is not necessarily being replaced by AI tools. It is changing. And so that's something that we have to acknowledge, that the overall experience of the search page has changed dramatically because of the integration of AI tools. So what we see on these search pages are things like these AI overviews at the top. And this is within a specific Google search page. We see features like the people also ask drop down there that are also AI curated and are pulling in results based on what the algorithm, feeds into Google's data, and then they prioritize that using their own AI-driven tools to help serve up what they think will be the best content for that particular query. So what we're seeing there, because these pages are so crowded with features now, is there's a lot more emphasis on finding the answer on this page and serving up all of the content that Google possibly can right away. That means that the number one result, which used to be kind of the king real estate that we were really trying to shoot for, is receiving a lot less traffic than it did in the past. That is specifically that 40 to 60% number. That's only if there's an AI overview on the page, which not every search results has those. It's something that's becoming more common, but it's in certain industries, they don't serve up as much. There's a lot of interesting research that people are doing and learning as to how that gets applied to pages, but it's not every page that gets these features. Some of them do, some of them don't. When they are there, you see about a 40 to 60% drop in your overall click-through rate to all search results that are just the traditional organic results. These AI overviews do drive some traffic, but it's not as much as old organic results used to. So what we're seeing for a lot of folks is that site organic traffic is trending slightly downward. The value is still there. The engagement is still there. It's just that less people are ending up clicking through completely to the site.
And one thing I'll add on with what Alex is saying is that downtrend in clicks on the SERPs has actually been something that's been going on for the last 10 years or so. It's something that, and that's, I mentioned SparkToro, that why that company became a thing is they noticed that trend. So they kind of wanted to look at audience data because that trend's getting more and more relevant. And I think Alex and I have talked about, we don't think it'll ever go away. It's just people's usage is shifting, right?
Yeah, the downward trend is not, while it is generating a little bit less traffic, it's not necessarily a sign based on what we're seeing that search is losing its relevance. It's just that
Correct.
it's the traffic patterns are changing. And no, we're not even necessarily seeing, we're seeing flows through that lead to the same amount or more conversions than used to be in the past coming through these alternate sources. It's just that people are finding your website in a lot of different ways now. And these things are changing and becoming more diffuse. This has led everyone to kind of prognosticate on this idea of the zero-click future. You may have heard this phrase before. It's something that digital marketers are talking about a lot now, where all of the internet essentially and all of this content exists as much as possible within a search function, so that you have essentially a front page of the internet for you. You type in some function, and it just ends up surfacing the result you're looking for, the exact content you're looking for. The internet and your traditional websites will shift around and become entirely different focused things, and all of that information will be pulled into search engines, and you won't necessarily need to have the same kind of website you used to in the past. This is, first off, if it's possible, it's a long way off. It's not something that I would recommend optimizing for right now. The other thing is that the data doesn't suggest that we're going towards a truly websiteless future at all. We're seeing some fluctuations in how people interact with things, but there's no justification, in my opinion, yet. I think it's a bold claim to think that we're going towards entirely just zero-click everything on search engines. There are some proponents of that theory, but we need to let the future develop a little bit before we necessarily commit to that as a strategic course of action. What I would say is that it is changing how maybe in the future we think about how website content is structured. For now, though, the best way to rank for some of these functions is very much to use the same tactics that we've been using for years on the SEO side. Traditional SEO is still, and this is coming straight from Google and from Microsoft themselves, the best way to rank for a lot of these functions and these search features that are showing up on pages is to rank well in organic results. So we're still appealing to the old cues that we used to, and those algorithms are just using those factors to serve people up in these different search modalities. So one of the best places where we can start is just by doing the tactics we've done in the past to try and appeal to these search algorithms and be served up in as many of these features as possible. However, it's kind of interesting to think of it in terms of the funnel when we think of how people find us and how people interact with us. So once we go to a website and look at the content strategy that we've been typically employing for websites, what you often see is websites that try and cover every base of the funnel, right? You have content that's specifically to bring people in, content to cultivate their interest, and then educate them a little bit more, and then eventually helping them engage or purchase and then retain, and then become persistent engagers with your product or service. This is how a lot of websites work nowadays, because you have to account for all of these. Now, in the future, if there were to be something more zero-click, or if people shift more towards using ChatGPT as the sort of discovery tool, the research tool, we are seeing more use that goes that way. Like I'd pointed out, people often start in ChatGPT or another AI tool and then move to Google to advance their consideration of a product or service and learn more once they have an initial understanding. So we are seeing those multi-touch points and people getting a lot of education there. That eventually moves into purchase. Right now, we still have websites that have to account for all of these, but in the future, if those tools are getting more sophisticated and people can do more of this awareness to consideration process on those tools, it may be that all we have to build a website towards is for the purchase and loyalty phases, maybe some consideration as well. Again, I want to reiterate, though, this is a long ways off. For now, in order to be findable, we still need to serve every phase of that funnel. So while there may be a shift coming where someday we can focus websites more towards just being the end point where users interact with us, and there's certainly some evidence to suggest that this is what Google eventually wants to do, but it's a long time coming. It will be a while before we've actually are able to totally shift a strategy around it. And so it's worth staying on top of and certainly worth being aware of the trend, but I wouldn't go about dramatically reinventing a website to try and accommodate this now, because for now, we still need those top of funnel pieces to be visible. We need to be findable in traditional search because that's what these AI tools are using to understand your site content and see where they should point people in terms of authority and understanding what content people are liking to engage with now. So we still need to largely think about content strategy and SEO the way we have in the past. It doesn't mean we don't want to stay aware of how these things are shifting. It just means that it's going to be a while before things transform in a big, dramatic way. And kind of going along with that, obviously all these tools are driving a lot of traffic. They're kind of shifting away how people are navigating the web and how they're finding your site and your content. And so I was curious for folks in the audience, are you actively monitoring your AI search traffic, whether that's referral traffic that comes from links to your content from AI tools, or if you've found a way to index or find a way to manage or monitor your AI overviews and your SERP positions, like features and things like that? I'm just curious if people are actively monitoring that. That's either a yes or a no. I'm not sure, or I didn't even know I could do that. That's a possible answer. I'll give you a chance to fill that out. All right. It looks like most people answered yes, or 45% of people saying yes, which is cool. Let me say no for about 36% or so. And then I'm not sure, and you can do that, are at the lower end with 9% each. So it looks like we have a lot of folks who are at least aware of what's going on on the SEO side and the AI side there. But if not, that's totally understandable because it's kind of a complex thing. It's very challenging to get visibility into AI traffic. And it's one of the biggest challenges facing us when it comes to navigating AI and SEO. What this has done, this challenge of trying to make these things interact together, is created a couple fields. Some people call it generative engine optimization. Some people call it AI optimization. Some people call it search everywhere optimization. There's a lot of different terminology that gets used. We've been using generative engine optimization internally, but all of these are saying the same thing. It's basically noting the evolution and how SEO is shifting and how people are finding my site, how do I make sure I stay visible in these AI tools, and how do I make sure that my content is still findable with all the way that search is changing? And so there's been a lot of pontification on what actually generative engine optimization involves. And what eventually we're settling on is that the same SEO tactics that have worked in the past pretty much still hold true here. So very much generative engine optimization in practice looks a lot like SEO. It's just that there have been some things that have become slightly more important, some factors that are maybe emphasized a bit more for AI visibility. Those are worth considering. But overall, a lot of the things that we've been doing before still tend to work now. So we're going to break down, some of what this looks like and what you can do to serve this. But generally, the tactics remain overall the same.
And one thing I'll add on before Alex goes into the tactics, this is a environment that's changing and we're learning a lot. What we said probably 8 months ago is different than now to an extent. And what we say in the next 6 months, year might change from what we say today. So it's something we're learning constantly about what works here.
Yeah, we're sort of crossing through the hype phase of AI at the moment. There was about a year plus there where the data and the ideas about it were largely educated by either fear or data we couldn't really grab, and just a lack of knowledge in general about what was really working and happening here. People have done a lot of great research and a lot of studies into how this stuff works. And so we're constantly trying to stay up to date on that. Obviously, this is a very quickly changing element here of search and of search engine marketing in general. So I would expect things to, even by the end of this week, things can be volatile and change, and features can be added or subtracted. And so it's a very interesting and volatile time. So it's definitely an important point. When it comes to what makes this challenging right now, and actually this is one thing we'll talk about on this slide in particular, is just how volatile it is. But in general, it's very difficult to get straight to what did someone actually type into an AI tool to end up on your site. There are a lot of search tools that are claiming to offer this kind of data, that they're giving you the actual prompt that someone typed in that you were visible for. No one can really do that. at the moment. It's in fact something that ChatGPT and those tools aren't making available yet. I expect that to change sometime in future, especially once they decide to monetize or if they create an ad platform. But for now, the only way they're doing this is essentially reverse engineering based on the page they visited, what that might have been found for. And we'll talk a little bit about vector data and how they might be interpreting that in a little bit, so that you can understand a little bit more about how these tools work. But just due to the nature of how large language learning models work, there's really not a viable, easy way for us to get the exact prompt that led to your site just yet. And that's something that what you're going to get is a sort of reverse engineered people found you maybe for this kind of approximation, which is something that we can get in more productive ways through other tools as well. There are lots of competing tools as well. We have ChatGPT, we have Gemini, we have Copilot, we have Claude. We have all sorts of different tools that are all using slightly different models and possibly optimizing for that. And this has calmed down a little bit lately as some of the leaders have emerged and we're really only focused, at least at the moment, on ChatGPT and Gemini as the major player. But when this was the Wild West and there were 1,000 tools being spun up every week, it was really a matter of, okay, maybe this tool operates differently, and does this tool use different factors to accommodate people and make things visible? That's not so much the case anymore, but it's still a challenge just because we don't have great visibility into some of the models and what the thinking is from the people that are running them. It's tough to make sure that we're serving all of these different search modalities at once. As I mentioned, constantly developing. We're always seeing changes. So optimizing for AI tool search be very difficult and develop and demand lots and lots of resources to stay in touch with, just because there's new data coming out all the time, new people learning about new algorithms and just changes that are adjusting our thinking constantly, and learning how these tools work without that visibility can be kind of tough. They also don't interact with your live page content. They interact with what they can crawl. So there is some ways that they can, depending on how recently they've crawled your content, they may have drawn some stuff from actual on-page content, but more likely they're looking at technical structure, they're looking at metadata, they're looking at tags and things of that nature. They're looking at stuff on the back end and the bottom end of the site to try and understand what your content is, as that's something that's a little bit more easily crawlable than getting to actual content on the page. That doesn't mean they're ignoring your content necessarily, but it's something that they're not going to crawl quite as frequently. So if you're making updates to content, that may not be recrawled. That said, Microsoft did just introduce a tool that allows you to a re-indexing of your site by all of their search tools. So for Bing in particular, and for that could be really valuable. So that's one thing to consider for that particular outlet. But that's just something that will request another index and ask for a crawl manually. There's also tons of hype. Thankfully, this is starting to calm down, and we're starting to actually see some real data-based arguments about how AI works and how best to optimize for them, and what content works well with them and tends to perform well. And you're starting to see people refine their approach to content a little bit based on those learnings and doing experiments and sharing data in a way that isn't just reacting to what's happening in the industry. So we are starting to get some data and some real meaningful learning about how these work, but there is still a lot of, sometimes unsubstantiated, sometimes not. Sometimes there is transformation happening that is genuine, hype about how meaningful these tools will be. And so it's hard to cut through the noise and understand what's really a factor and what's not. So given that, based on our data, based on what we're seeing in the industry, there's a couple things you can do to make sure that you're optimizing for AI and for just general future-proofing for search visibility and across the board. What you'll notice about these is they're going to look pretty familiar to what, if you follow SEO or if you're familiar with how it works at all, they're going to look pretty familiar. There's basically investing in high-quality content. Then there's getting what visibility you can into AI tracking and your data and how people are finding you through AI. Again, there's some limits here, but there are some things that we can do to get an early idea of how this traffic is finding us. And then there's brand authority, which is backlinks, which have always been a part of SEO. But more than just building lots and lots of backlinks, it's about building authoritative and quality ones and making sure your brand is visible in the right places. And then obviously the technical side and other new search modalities that you need to account for are worth keeping in tabs of, and making sure that you're writing content that serves those things as they emerge. So when it comes to quality content, EEAT is an acronym you may have heard before. It's about experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness in content. This was a Google standard that was circulated and became sort of the golden guide for what SEO content should be. It's still very much relevant. There are some people who dismiss this as important, but that's not borne out in data. A lot of the same things are still performing well in search. So content that demonstrates that you know what you're talking about, that you're an authoritative source of information, that you're citing other authoritative sources of information too, and that you have an overall well-maintained, fresh site too, something that's adding a lot of content on a regular basis that demonstrates that same expertise. That sort of consistent record of posting good, fresh, reliable content in a topic still performs very well. It performs in organic search well, and that means that it's going to get pulled into those AI search results more frequently. So it's still, the base of this pursuit is still quality, authoritative content.
And one thing to add there, when you think about what Google's done historically, when they update their algorithm, it's always been to push high quality content. So while you might be able to get spam or low quality content to work for a period, to future proof yourself, high quality content's not going to get hit as often. It might accidentally buy some updates from Google or these LLMs and kind of lose ranking. You're going to keep your rankings more than likely as you do that, because that's ultimately what they want. They want to give quality content to the end user.
Yeah, we just saw this. The most recent Google Core update in August was heavily focused on AI spam content that was finding a way to crawl up in search engine results features. So those feature tools SEOs were finding ways to manipulate their way to the top of those. And so there was a heavy corrective action that shifted things far back the other way. There was a lot of volatility, particularly in search features, but that was just in August. And so they are definitely kicking back hard against the idea that any sort of low quality or AI programmatic content can bubble up in these results. Using AI isn't a problem. You can totally use it to generate content and still rank well. It's just that it has to be quality. It has to be something that has value to users. So they don't really care. And that's, again, coming straight from them. They don't really care, Google, if you use AI content. It's just that they want it to be good and helpful to users. So the human pass is always going to be required to make sure that happens. I think as we talk through content too, it's important to understand, at least at a basic level, how AI finds content or understands content. Basically what it does, and this is just at a very high level, it takes all of these cues about content and topics and words and how they're and contexts and how they're related to each other within particular frameworks and how a sentence works and these various points of knowledge that it drives together into translates into what is a actual coordinate map of data. So it's actually a three-dimensional, which we'll get is a map of how topics and various bits of information are related to one another. And it's all semantic. It's all contextual. It helps it understand on a more sophisticated level than just looking at words alone and understanding their meaning within individual sentences. It helps them understand in a more complex way what might happen next or what when the next thought or sentence might be. And then for search, it uses that to try and understand what result you might be looking for based on that. So it's a numbers-based interpretation of language data models or language data submissions that are used to kind of parse all this out and translate into a big map. So if you type in shoes, for example, into a LLM tool, it's going to look at this massive map that it's going to reference of all the related topics and all the related ideas and words and how they're mapped to one another. This is a two-dimensional picture of a three-dimensional map, so some of these ones that are especially big are more they're close to me in this particular perspective. So I could spin this around and see different elements here. This is a 3D visualizer tool called Projector TensorFlow. It's really interesting to engage with if you're interested in seeing a little bit of how AIs think. You can type in a word or a topic, and it will show you a map like this. So these are all things and phrases that are associated in one way or another with the phrase shoes in context. Now, to us, this may look like a big map that we can't do much with, but to a learning language model, this helps them understand, okay, within shoes, what are the sort of the phrases that I can predict someone might be about to use, and what ideas or concepts might they be about to interact with in the sentence. So when I say that when someone's reverse engineering what you're being found for, That's essentially what they're doing. They're breaking your site into this data, which you can do. You can use tools like Screaming Frog and other elements to actually pull out that vector data. So you'll get those coordinates like I was showing on the previous slide. And you can use that to understand how how people are finding your site or what topics your site currently covers according to LLM tools. You can find this in a lot more easy ways too. SEMrush pulls this out and kind of isolates your site in terms of topics that you're using and topics that it finds you for or understands you for. They'll just be reverse engineering that into a prompt. It will be a basic synthesized prompt. It will not be literally what a user typed in. It will just be here's what someone might have typed in to find you based on a reverse engineering of your vector data for that particular page. So it's not a literal translation, it's just a guess. However, you can also use this to understand, okay, here's where I might have a hole in my content, where there might be a topic I'm not touching on that I'd like to. And that comes in with tools like this keyword opportunity tool on SEMrush. And we also have SparkToro, which is a great tool for researching audience interests and affinities and what topics they exist on sites that they also visit. And so visitors to your site go to this, maybe they use a social media site more than another. Maybe they have a particular interest in a given topic. These things are all gathered in a SparkToro and they're insights that you can draw from there. And so it's a really valuable tool. It's one we use a lot to try and find holes in topics in content and where we might be serving content ideas that might be interesting to our users. And then we just look and see if we can corroborate that with what has search volume to try and find something that is likely to drive new search traffic. So there's a lot of valuable tools. It's just that what we can't give you, unfortunately, is exactly what prompt someone used to find your site. When it comes to building authority, that's all about getting out there on the web and getting links back to your site, just like it's always been. And it's about maintaining visibility in authoritative places that are relevant or sources that are relevant to your business or your service or whatever it is you're trying to promote. And just developing your authority online by being visible in those places. Essentially, a backlink is a vote of confidence in what you offer. Somebody saying, I want to cite this particular source. And that over time is rewarded by greater search visibility. So they're a really prominent thing to pursue, but it's worth it to go for quality ones only and do the hard work of actually reaching out and finding valuable collaboration opportunities instead of just trying to spam the web and get your links everywhere. It's great to go for the places that have a lot of authority and to get them to link back to you and work together and provide mutual value to your users that way. That's really is what Google is selecting for most of all.
Yeah, and to build on that, there is a recent study that came out on LLMs really look for how often you're mentioned online. So not just a backlink, but it can be other things like you're mentioned in Reddit, you're mentioned in Meta, LinkedIn, things like that. So that's just another factor they use. I would guess, and I know this has already happened to some extent, there's going to be less value on that. I think it was Gemini was overvaluing Reddit posts for a while, and that's been pulled back on some. So there's going to be a lot of adjustments in that going forward, but it's something to note.
Yeah, about 2 months or so ago, Reddit's stock price crashed because they started being valued less in search results. They absolutely exploded for a while, and then we started to see less role that they were playing in search results because Reddit is user generated, not a great source of information necessarily. So probably a good thing that one's getting dialed back as a source of authoritative search information. The next thing I want to emphasize is just the technical side of things. There's a lot of things that we do for clients that are focused more on the back end elements. So things like managing, tagging structure of pages and adding schema.org data or structured data to a site, or just generally making sure that the content is quality and serves up to users in a way that loads fast and is responsive across all environments. And then we also manage metadata and things of that nature to just make sure that every queue that we can possibly send to, whether it's to a user or to an algorithm, whether that's an LLM or just a traditional search algorithm, is aligned towards being found for what we want to be found for. So we just look for how we can do that on the technical side. There's a lot of stuff to keep in mind here, but we have a lot of experience helping people with this. So that's something that we can help with. Pardon me. Structured data markup is one of the things that's kind of a buzzy topic at the moment, just because there's a lot of people talking about it from an AI perspective, and it can be really valuable. Schema.org is the framework that most people use to try and add a little snippet of code to their site that tags their content so that algorithms can more easily understand it. It doesn't have to look at the page and try and filter it out and understand it that way. It's just something that tells it, hey, this is a how-to element, or this is that's specifically an FAQ or something like that. You can see kind of in the top middle of that example of some schema.org code, there's a type row and it says how to next to it. It's a bunch of types like these that have a particular data framework that you fill out for each page. And it just says, it surfaces to tools immediately. This is a how-to page. This is an FAQ. This is a recipe, things like that. It just makes it easy for search engines to then pull into whatever their dedicated feature for that content type is. Google supports many of these, including here, you can see how the how-to, it's pulled this into an actual how-to SERP feature that looks like this, that kind of lays out the content based on its ability to understand what that is. So these are really valuable. It's not something that every site needs, just because there's certain frames that this works for, and not all content needs a schema.org tag. So it's worth just looking into it strategically and making sure that it makes sense for you and your content. But it can be a very powerful tool for both LLMs and traditional search. Another bit of schema, or not schema.org, but another structured data framework that is getting a lot of buzz is the LLMS.txt file. The word salad tripped me up there, or letter salad, I guess. And what that does is it was a well-intentioned data structure that was meant to serve up for AI tools and organic search algorithms a little bit more information on what the content is on the page and what we would like those tools to index and draw from. So it was an attempt by someone not just to help AI tools and search algorithms crawl your site a bit more efficiently. So essentially a single file that would provide some basic site data or content data. It actually was something that was meant to be helpful for site owners too. Something where people could put out and control a little bit what would be crawled by AI search tools, because it felt like content was being actively stolen by these tools. And there's still a lot of debate about whether that is actually what the copyright thing is there and how content ownership works in this new day and age. But this was an attempt to try and protect against that. It hasn't really served up in the way that it was hoped to. Again, a well-intentioned effort to try and control these things and try and make yourself more visible in AI search that as yet hasn't really grabbed a whole lot of attention from AI tools. Has outright said that they ignore the LLMS.txt file. They do not crawl or reference or use it. Logs show no requests in some experiments that I've run with some colleagues at the University of Iowa, where I used to work, where there's just no server pinging pulling these, at least in a few isolated cases. So we have some data to show that there's not necessarily a reference to this from ChatGPT or other tools. So it's a really nice idea. And I actually do hope that something like this becomes the norm, because it'd be nice to give site owners a little bit more control. But right now, there's not a whole lot of incentive for AI tools and search owners to pull in the data that we tell them to only when they have access to everything else anyway. And there's no real way of restricting that process, aside from making yourself invisible in search, which would be a bad idea, because then you're invisible entirely. So hopefully the structure becomes something that we can adapt in future, because I would like to see some more control there. But right now, it's just not doing what people hoped it would. So the big thing is, what should I do then? Again, we just come back to useful and high quality content, returning value to your users as much as possible, and making sure that you can get as much data as you can about where AI traffic is coming from. But again, recognizing that that is limited right now. We can do some things around referral traffic and track and links that come to us from AI tools. But beyond that, it's a little bit hard to track Google AI overview traffic and some other tools that surface AI visibility at the moment. We can track positions, but not necessarily literal traffic. So do what you can, keep up with it, and we can certainly help in that regard. But you want to focus on building your overall visibility everywhere. The term search everywhere optimization has been adopted for a reason. It's about hitting all of these different new modalities at once and making sure that you're visible in as many places as you possibly can be. That was true before, but now we have more visibility and more modalities splitting out and, presenting new ways for people to find us. So we need to account for as many of them as we can. And to do that, we're going to focus on the technical health of your site and just generally create good content and make sure that you're providing a responsive and fresh experience on the site. And like I said, this is all pretty similar to what we've been doing in the past as far as how SEO and AI interact. And that's really the key takeaway that I want to leave people with here, is just that while a lot is changing in the search space, like Ed brought up, good content at the end of the day will always serve you well. And so we really put a lot of focus on making sure that it's valuable content that we're producing, and just making sure that we're focusing on that's going to be valuable, that has search volume, that drives traffic, and that suits strategically what you want to be found for. And that's really what we're looking at when it comes to how AI and SEO are interacting at the moment.